I'm from Australia, and I used to work at a 24-hour gas station in the little town of Barham, which is near the Murray River and where many residents have spooky experiences to tell. When I first started working at the station, my coworker told me not to be alarmed if I noticed strange shadows on the security cameras because the station was quiet and remote, especially at night. The security cameras were always recording, and I could watch their live feed on a small TV behind the counter, which showed not only the empty parking lot and the gas pumps, but also the dark air surrounding the station where the shadows would occasionally move. People in the area frequently talk about strange happenings and ghostly sightings near the river. I started my first shift that night, but fortunately they assigned someone to work with me because I was new and nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night by around 2 a.m. My boss told me that strange things were happening around the gas pumps and that occasionally the lights over the pumps would suddenly go out. He also told me not to worry about it and that I could stay in the back room until a customer arrived. When I asked him why, he responded in a very Aussie way because they are not customers, they are not your friends, and if you pay attention to them, really bad things will happen. Things began to feel very odd. The fridge light would sometimes flicker and the radio kept cutting in and out with bursts of static, but the scariest thing was what I saw on the security cameras. I watched as a figure slowly walked back and forth right at the edge of the overhead lights near the pump. Beyond the light, the road was completely dark, a pitch black stretch that swallowed everything. My coworker Tony, who was on shift with me, also saw the strange figure. He tried hard to ignore it as if he didn't want to show that he was scared in front of me. It was odd that when a car's headlights shone on the road where the figure was pacing, the figure suddenly disappeared. This made it clear that it wasn't a real physical person. After the car owner finished filling up his tank, he came to the counter to pay. I did my best to act normal, hiding how shaken I was, but then he said something that made my stomach drop. I just saw something weird out there. I thought I saw someone, but when my lights hit them, they were just gone. If that wasn't the understatement of the year, I don't know what was. That night was one I'd never forget. I am not ashamed to say that I quit that job after just 4 days because I could not work another night shift there. Then a few months later, I went to a mate's house for a bonfire on his parents' property, which we called the Go. The night was cool and the stars shone brightly above us. We burned garden waste in a big fire and sat around it. We talked, laughed, and relaxed with a few drinks in hand. It was mid-July and the night was quite cold. In a small town like this, you often know everyone, even the teenagers, so it wasn't a big surprise to see Tony from the petrol station at the Go. I knew I had to ask him about what had happened that night. As soon as I sat down with him, we started chatting. I remember him saying, "You got out of that place at the right time." I asked him why he meant that and if something had happened then. He said, "I saw the shadow pacing, but then it started calling my name." Tony's normally laid-back demeanor changed as he spoke. It sounded like my grandmother, but she passed away when I was around 12. He took a deep breath to regain his composure before continuing, and every night after that, the same voice and words asked me to come outside. The way he said it chilled me. I could tell that this wasn't just a story to him. Whatever he had seen or heard, it was something he wished he could forget. I quit about 2 weeks after you did because of that, and I still can't get the voice out of my head. The unusual occurrences have continued since that night, and I've been particularly interested in the paranormal ever since. I now live in Maine, Brisbane, and city life is quite different. Although there are still some encounters I can't explain, Barham will always be the most haunted location I've ever been at. I began researching techniques to think more rationally about these occurrences and soon discovered that most so-called paranormal phenomena had answers. Last year, after finishing high school, I moved to a new city. I spent a lot of time looking at different colleges and finally chose one that was about 3 hours away from my old town. I decided to live on my own, so I searched for an apartment and found a small place where I didn't have to share with anyone. The apartment was in a safe neighborhood with friendly neighbors, and the rent was affordable enough for me. It was also near several parks, cafes, in a shopping area. For the first 4 months, everything was great. I felt completely safe and there were no problems at all. And during this time, I became good friends with a guy who went to the same college as me, and he lived only about 5 minutes away from my apartment, so we often visited each other's places. Then one night, just as winter was beginning, he called me and invited me over to hang out and play video games. When I arrived at his place, we set up our gaming console and started a new game. We talked about our classes, shared random funny stories, and enjoyed listening to music in the background. At about 1 a.m. we decided to finish up and I went back to my apartment. Once inside, I went out onto the balcony that overlooked the building's entrance to smoke. I remember looking around and noticing that there was no one else outside. It was a very cold winter night, and since it wasn't the weekend, everyone was already in their homes. I could see only 1 or 2 cars slowly passing by on the empty street. The quiet made the night feel even colder and more peaceful. I decided to call it a night and began getting ready for bed. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and turned off the lights in my room. Just then I heard a short ring at my doorbell. I paused in the middle of my room for several seconds as I wondered who could be there at this late hour. I tiptoed to the door and leaned in close, listening carefully to see if I could hear anyone outside. Now my first thought was that maybe my friend had come over to drop off something I might have forgotten, but then I remembered he usually texts or calls first if he's coming over. I listened for about half a minute until the person rang the doorbell again and knocked a couple times lightly. I stood very still, trying not to make any noise that might reveal I was at the door. I could hear the stranger moving around inside the apartment for a few seconds before he stopped. I waited carefully for any sound, but everything stayed quiet. My heart pounded as I lifted the cover and peered outside. My legs felt weak and almost numb when I saw a dark hooded figure staring right back at me. The figure's face was mostly covered by the hood, and he was holding the zipper of his hoodie in a way that covered his face, so all I could see was his forehead and his eyes. It seemed as if he had noticed something, either the sound of the peephole cover or my heavy, nervous breathing. In an instant he moved away from the peephole. His sudden motion startled me, and then he spoke in a cold, low voice, saying, "I know you're at the door." His words sent a chill down my spine. I stood there frozen and filled with dread, but I found the courage to say, "I'm calling the cops, man." He just laughed and replied, "Sure thing, big guy." Then he wiped the door handle with his sleeve before walking away. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, they told me I wasn't the only one he had bothered. Apparently, he had been doing this for at least a month, and the police suspected him of a home invasion to a case where a father had chased him out of a house. I stayed at my friend's house for about a week after that night, because I didn't feel safe going back to my apartment right away. During that time, I kept thinking about what had happened, replaying the moment in my head over and over. The stranger's voice, his creepy laugh, and the way he covered his face with his hoodie, it all stuck with me. A year has gone by and I still haven't heard anything about him, so I believe it's more likely that he simply moved to a different area to continue doing the same thing somewhere. I kept checking the news in the hopes of hearing something about him getting caught, but there was nothing, and eventually I started to feel normal again, even though the memory never truly goes away. There was a lot of snow in the UK's north in March. I decided that I didn't need to clean the entire windshield because I had not used it all day, so I just scraped off a small section of ice from the area where I would see clearly while driving. A few minutes later, I locked my car and went into the grocery store. which is a small store on a busy crossroads that leads to 4 different areas. Occasionally, there are really good deals, so I looked around what started as a quick trip to buy some fizzy. I was not working that day, and everything was covered in a thick layer of snow and ice when I looked outside at 8:30. Pop ended with me leaving the store with my hands full, so the shop assistant helped me open the door. Now normally he would help me get to my car, but tonight he was busy and almost ready to close up the shop. I decided to make things easier by unlocking my car door from inside the store so I could quickly go to my car. I thought this would save time, but it turned out to be one of my first mistakes. When I unlocked the car, all the lights suddenly switched on because it was very dark outside at first. I was happy about the bright lights since the car park had no other lights. As I walked to my car, I saw 2 men running from one side of the crossroads toward the shop. I didn't think much of it and opened the driver's door. I started putting my shopping into the passenger seat. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone running past me. I assumed it was one of the men who wanted to get inside the shop to escape the cold. I got into my car, closed the door, and was about to start the engine when I heard a knock on the passenger window. I looked over and saw a middle-aged man with a huge smile just staring at me. His eyes were fixed on me in a way that made me feel uneasy. I hurriedly put the vehicle in reverse as the guy started laughing loudly and continued tugging on the door handle as if he believed it would open if he pushed hard enough. However, as soon as I did, the parking sensors began beeping loudly, and I looked at the rearview mirror when I noticed the second man blocking my path. I was completely trapped, and the only way out was to drive backward, but I was too scared to do so because I had left my phone at home, and the shop was only a few minutes away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of the car, and the man on the left side of my car kept pulling the door handles and had begun banging on the windows. He looked increasingly irate, and his eyes were fixed on me the entire time. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang, and I turned to see that the man on my left had just kicked off one of my side mirrors. That was it, and I knew I had to do whatever it took to get out of there. So I quickly put the car in reverse and hit the gas. The man behind my car jumped out of the way as I turned, but now the other man was standing right in front of me. I wasn't going to let him stop me. I aimed the car straight at him and drove forward. At the last second, he jumped aside, and I sped out of the parking lot, racing back home as fast as I could. Since my car was easy to recognize, I decided to park a little farther from my house. I didn't want them to figure out where I lived if they had followed me as I got out to check if my side mirror could be fixed. I noticed something worse. My front tire had been slashed with a knife and was completely flat. A chill ran through me as I thought about what could have happened since he damaged my car. I don't think they were trying to steal it, but when they saw the lights turn on, they probably thought I was an easy target, alone in a dark parking lot with nowhere to go. Now I'm more careful than ever. I only unlock my car when I'm standing right next to it, and I've changed the settings so only the driver's door unlocks. I always check my surroundings before getting in, and I never sit in my car for too long after parking. Most importantly, I never go to that shop after dark anymore. No matter how short the trip, I won't take the risk again. Not a completely first-hand experience, but one from my brother from 2013, I believe, that we constantly bring up. We are both from Scotland's Northwest Highlands, a secluded and peaceful area, and one winter we lived there while doing the same job, farming fish. Long nights, frigid temperatures, and powerful storms may make winters difficult. Our little community consists of around 50 homes dispersed across a few kilometers down the coast. Except from the few street lights, the area is mostly dark and open, with the sea and mountains on each side. My brother was renting a large house about half a mile up the road, which had about 6 bedrooms and was very old. It was sat among trees at a bend in the road, and most of the rooms were empty and filled with old stuff, which gave the house a slightly eerie feel. I was living with my mom in her little stone house, which was warm and safe and where nothing strange happened. My brother tended to spend most of his time in his living room and bedroom. We also converted one of the downstairs rooms into a gym that we used together. One evening, while he was watching TV by himself, the door leading outside his living room was stuck shut and hadn't been used in a long time. Suddenly, the door handle began to shake as if someone outside was grabbing it and attempting to open the door. The rest of the door didn't move, only the handle. What was even stranger was that the house had large windows, and from where he was sitting, he could see the outside of the door. If someone had been there, he would have seen them. After a while, the rattling stopped, but my brother had a hard time sleeping that night. Since he doesn't usually believe in such things, I think he was telling the truth. Later, when I was working out alone in our gym, which we had set up in one of the downstairs rooms, I heard a noise from upstairs that sounded like slow, heavy footsteps or something big being dragged across the floor. I stood motionless, trying to figure out what it was. Since the home was ancient, I reasoned that it was most likely simply the wind blowing through the deserted rooms. When I lived there, I took my mom's dog for walks and he would frequently stop, raise his fur, and growl toward the ruin at night because it is the closest building to my brother's house. The other old buildings in the area felt empty and harmless, and because they were close to the road, the street lights made them easy to ignore, but this one was different. Most likely a deer or some other animal stayed there, which bothered the dog. The ruin's sharp, dark shape also had a way of making the mind wander, and I can't get rid of the feeling that something sad and angry there is disturbing anyone nearby on a cold Highland winter.